Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tammy Yates Rajadure. I am the Executive Director of Realize, and my other job, which is a volunteer one, is as a member of the steering committee of the Disability and Work in Canada committee. And I say the other job because it takes a lot of work to put this together. We are in breakout number 3, Confederation 3, for the conference. And this session, which of course I am very partial to, is evaluating an immersive learning pilot on living and working with episodic disabilities. And why am I partial to it? Because the moderator and a few of the panelists are part of my team at Realize. So I am actually going to swiftly, in the essence of time, hand over to Melissa Egan, who is the national lead of episodic disabilities at Realize. And Melissa will introduce herself as well as the other panelists. I will have, at some point, a working mic for questions in the room, so I'll be your roving mic runner as well. And then Melissa will hand over to me to wrap up before lunch. Thank you for being here. Melissa, over to you.
Test 1, 2. 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 It's still test 1, 2. We're working on trying to make this better. I'm gonna sing the song while I come to the front.
How about this? Does that sound okay? All right, everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning. It is amazing to see so many of you out here today. Yeah, this is such an exciting opportunity. It's really wonderful that we all get to share space over the next couple of days and do some learning and some community building. As Tammy said, my name is Melissa Egan. I am the National Lead of Episodic Disabilities at Realize. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be both presenter and moderator for you today. I am joined on this panel by Sunny Wang and Sri Nalamotu, who will also be presenting with me today. So I'm just going to introduce them quickly. Sri is the co-executive director at Toronto Neighborhood Centres, and Sri is a passionate connector, a storyteller, and has extensive experience in relationship building, civic engagement, and participatory filmmaking. Her work at TNC focuses on supporting various advocacy campaigns, collaborations, and research in the areas of 2S LGBTQIA+ inclusion, disability justice, equity and belonging, and people-centered community development practice. Thanks for being here, Sri. And Sunny is the Knowledge to Action Officer at Realize. Sunny first joined Realize in 2018 as a student working in the HIV and aging program. And from there, she found her calling in public health work, particularly in improving health service access through education, community-based programming, research, and policy change. Sunny is especially passionate about youth mental health and sexual health. So if any of you don't know, Realize is a national, multi-sector, multidisciplinary organization, and we work to improve the health and well-being of people living with episodic disabilities, including HIV, across the lifespan. And we do this by participating in research, providing education, and advocating for policy and practice change. We do this through interventions that address and enhance the physical, mental, and social health of people living with episodic and other disabilities. We are the National Secretariat for the Episodic Disabilities Forum, and we also host the National Summit on Episodic Disabilities and Employment. Now I'm afraid of this. Okay. All right. I'm going to keep going. My apologies if that happens again. Whew. Okay, so as I said, we do host the National Summit on Episodic Disabilities and Employment. There are information sheets on your tables. Please join us. This is coming up on March 20th and 21st next year. We'd love to see you there. I do want to begin by defining episodic disability because lots of people don't know this terminology. Episodic disabilities are conditions characterized by periods of relative good health interrupted by periods of relative illness or disability. And these periods can vary in length and severity and predictability from one person to another. Some examples include anxiety, depression, multiple sclerosis, arthritis, sickle cell, cystic fibrosis, long COVID, and so many more. There is a very long list of these. Realize works to create an umbrella because many of these conditions have specific organizations that work for them in advocacy and support. And what Realize tries to do is bring folks together to build community around episodic disability so that we are a strong and united voice. Today's panel is a deep dive into our recently developed immersive learning experiences. You will likely hear us call them ILEs quite a lot over the next couple of minutes. What they are is a scaffolded, interactive, tailored, group-based approach to learning about episodic disabilities for workplaces. They are flexible and contextualized presentations that use a slow learning, integrated and experiential learning approach. And these are very central principles that we try and ground the ILEs in over the course of each session. What we try and do is use reflective questions to engage the group and individuals through writing and thought. There is a focus on discussion, both small and large group, just depending on the size of the participant group we're working with. There are 4 sessions, each are 2 hours long. They include the first session called Considering Disability, the second, Beyond DEI to Ideal, which we have talked about a little bit this morning, but to remind you, ideal is inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility, leading to belonging. The third session is Centering Lived Experience, and the 4th session is Organizational Communication and Episodic Disability. These ILEs were developed to support organizational efforts to enhance belonging, and we discuss and reflect on how workplace policies, practices, and values impact the experience of living and working with episodic disability. These immersive learning experiences are envisioned to open workplace discussions on topics that many people find challenging to understand, challenging to discuss, and even more challenging to implement. And some of these include the intersection of personal and organizational values, socially influenced assumptions, power structures, and workplace implications of that power. Workplace culture change is so often downloaded onto frontline staff. And there is so much of that culture that actually lives with leadership and board. So we try and train folks at that leadership and board level. And when leadership prioritizes learning, we see culture change occurring throughout an organization. So our focus is really on leadership and board members. The intent behind the facilitation and the style and the approach of these particular sessions is to meet organizations where they're at. And so we center discussions on their specific areas of need, including the fundamental principles, communication styles, and readiness to implement change during each section. So the structure of these particular pieces of education is flexible. And as a facilitator, I can tailor content to the areas of need and interest of that specific organization. In each session, I do focus on an experiential learning approach. That is kind of the pedagogical approach that I use, and engage participants by connecting the subject to their own experiences. I also encourage group discussion and personal reflection so that people can really get a fulsome understanding of something that is not just housed within their workplace identity, but also intersects with their own personal identity. I always facilitate with curiosity, without judgment, and with a very open attitude towards questions and inquiry. This gives me the opportunity to act as a guide for people as well as a model. And so that encourages participants to connect with others in the same style that I am working to connect with them. And at the end of every session, we intentionally don't share the slide decks that I use. What I share instead is the reflection questions that have been asked throughout each presentation so that those can continue to serve as a guide for the work. Some of these include: what challenges would you say create the most significant barriers to belonging for employees with less power in your organization? Also, what challenges may exist to inviting discussion around intersectionality in your organization? And what strengths do you have as a listener? And what next step might help you to become a more active listener? So we really encourage people to do that reflection for themselves, to have these conversations about some of these big issues that are often very touchy in an environment with a group of people who have been encouraged to be curious and to not judge each other while they are working through these issues. To get a little bit more into the experience itself, I'm going to pass the microphone over to Sri, who will walk you through the journey that Toronto Neighborhood Centres took before participating in the ILE. And then we will pass it on to Sunny, who will give us a sense of the evaluation of these sessions. And then I will come back and wrap it up with a Q&A. All right? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Melissa, and thank you for having me, inviting me to share our experience with the ILEs. I have a little bit about the journey, but for the sake of time, I think I'm gonna keep it brief about who we are. We're a network of 28 nonprofits across Toronto. And we started this work more intentionally in 2020. And it started with convening a disability justice affinity group, and that was with staff across all of the different agencies, staff who play different roles at their agencies. And it was made up of folks who identify as having disabilities, as well as folks who aspire to be allies and wanted to do some of the culture change work with us. So one of the key things that came out of the disability justice group was the importance of leaders doing this work. Not because frontline staff and program staff, I will tell you, are always doing this work. So it was really important for us to be intentional and make time and find the supports needed to support executive directors, HR, and their board members. So that was one key thing. And the other thing that we realized that you know, led us to this partnership was the fact that we did do some work around reviewing and updating our policies with HR folks. And then we realized, well, that's not going to really take hold in any meaningful way if we don't do the culture change work first. So that's how we found ourselves in partnership with and this opportunity with Realize. And I guess what I would like to share is some of the challenges that came up for us in doing this. One was around changing the way we learn and how experiential is hard because it requires us to be vulnerable and take risks, right? So that was sort of an adjustment people had to make. Another adjustment is it's a different pace, right? I don't like to say slower because it's not slower, it's just deeper. So it's adjusting to that pace, and yeah, not expecting like immediate answers and solutions, which is the other challenge we had, is working with a lot of people who are in leadership. You know, leaders want solutions, answers, toolkits, and those toolkits are kind of a curse, right? Because they're only as useful as the other work, the culture shift, right? If we don't have a change in our culture and the way we sort of address attitudinal biases and, you know, ableism in the workplace, policies aren't going to make a difference in any meaningful way anyway. And it was also getting people to prioritize the work, right? Because there's always so many things going on and so many important things, right, that leaders are juggling. But I guess it just, you know, it's interesting. Melissa and I talked often about that just how do we get folks to prioritize? And then it was just like, they just need to do it. And Melissa described it as the first step to culture change, making this work a priority, and that's really stuck with me. And then the other thing is around trying not to get stuck in the usual excuses around funding, funders, and resourcing, right? We could just get stuck there and not do anything, which I think has been, you know, kind of what sort of kept this work back, right? And kept it from really taking root. So, and then the other thing is intersectionality. It's the challenge, you know, is that we do a lot of anti-oppression work. We call it EDI, DEI, all of these things, right? But we do everything in buckets, you know, and without understanding how interrelated identities mutually shape issues that we're trying to address. And I think that for us is a big learning curve, but you know, something we're really committed to, because it's all interconnected and we need to start working at it in that way. And then, you know, the idea of not doing more harm in our learning. And what I mean by that is just being really aware of, you know, who's holding the labor in this learning journey that we're on together. And also just recognizing, you know, that we should be mindful of sometimes, you know, as we're growing and learning, it should not be at the expense of others who are doing this with you, or who have been, you know, who are in the space with you. And I guess it's just being thoughtful and creating that space for each other. And I guess, you know, as an participant, this is what, for me, as well as my colleagues that did this with me, these are some of the things that came up for us. Making space to sit with questions rather than rush to solutions was really important. These questions are our most important tools for now, and they're our guide, and keep the work present for us. Not complicating what's actually pretty simple. Melissa's did a wonderful job every session of giving us some basic tips on, you know, just day-to-day practices of, you know, especially around language, you know, and ways we can interact with each other in just better ways, or more thoughtful ways. These sessions and the way they're designed were fantastic in harnessing the wisdom and experience of the people in the room. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize and start from. And it was just a really valuable space, because it was a space for us to think about what co-designing, what success looks like in a job with the person who is doing that job. It was space that we could imagine what job sharing could look like. It was a space we could imagine what flexible work hours and flexibility could look like. It was a time and space for us to remember the values and the values that we are committed to in our work. And it was a space for us to imagine what's possible for all of us when we focus on addressing issues in our environment and not the individual. So those were, I think, some of the key lessons that, for me and my colleagues. So, and I think for the next steps is, like Melissa mentioned, the reflective questions. That was what we have in our toolkit for now. And that is, it's so incredibly valuable in terms of helping us ground the next leg of this work and the next bit of this work. And there's also, for us in this work, a commitment to building the capacity of our leaders and our board members. So this work, this change, the culture shift that we're hoping and we're aspiring to is part of the DNA, I guess, of our agencies, how important that is. And so all of this work, it's about sustainability, right? It's making sure it's there for future folks who are coming into into our work or agencies, sector. So I'm going to stop there and pass it on to Sunny.
Hello? Testing? Can everyone hear me? Yes? Okay, wonderful. Thank you for sharing those insights, Sri. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all doing well and enjoying the conference so far. My name is Sunny, and I'm the Knowledge to Action Officer at Realize. It's my pleasure to share with you some of our findings and impacts from these ILE sessions. To begin, I'd like to briefly go over our evaluation approach. So we used a combination of online surveys and focus groups to evaluate the impact of the sessions and to collect participant feedback. In the surveys, participants were asked about their key impressions and takeaways from the sessions, the relevance and application of the session material, and any suggestions for future improvement. After the final ILE session, we also conducted a Zoom focus group and just delving a little bit deeper into the questions that were sent out in the online surveys. First, I'd like to go over the results from these online surveys. In terms of overall impressions of the ILE sessions, participants really appreciated having a safe space to share their personal stories, which then led to the development of new perspectives and lessons learned, as well as ways to engage in topics of disability in the workplace. So I'd like to share some quotes from the surveys. One participant had said, quote, "I appreciated the information, the perspectives from people who live with disabilities, the information exchange, and the sense of safety in the group," end quote. Another participant shared that there was, quote, "lots of engagement, bringing personal stories outside of the workplace, which may have allowed folks to also consider how to respond in the workplace," end quote. Some participants suggested more small group work in the sessions or working in pairs to enable a deeper dive into certain topics as well. When it comes to main learnings and takeaways, participants noted that many challenges and uncertainties exist when it comes to disability justice work, such as overcoming barriers to inclusivity, improving HR policy, and increasing one's understanding of episodic disability. So one participant noted, quote, "There is uncertainty on the agency's part about how to integrate this disability justice work with other activities. There are challenges to making transformative headway that are presented by HR and legal frameworks, and agencies need to be encouraged to share any creative pathways to change that can somehow address these impediments. It sounds more like an art than any off-the-shelf answers, end quote. And I thought that was very illustrative. Importantly, many participants shared that language is powerful when it comes to framing disability in the workplace, specifically learning how to have conversations about intersectionality, about ableism and inclusivity while also applying a disability justice lens. This can all lead to a better understanding of how people live with and experience disability in the workplace. In terms of relevance, most participants found that the information was meaningful and useful to their own organizational work. One participant shared, quote, "The information and conversation were very relevant to the work and need to be an ongoing conversation within teams and management so that it doesn't just become this item that gets checked off," end quote. However, another participant noted, quote, "We are a small workplace and the majority of our staff are frontline. So some of the discussions around offering flexibility with schedule and remote work are not something that reflects our situation," end quote. When it comes to application of the information learned, participants highlighted the utility of two main concepts from the ILE sessions: universal design and accessibility. One participant noted that, quote, "It is important to look at accommodation and accessibility as universal and to think about how organizations can work for everyone," end quote. Someone else said that they were able to, quote, "talk about universal design so workplaces work for everyone," end quote. And another person said that they were, quote, "really reflecting on access versus accommodation and how to ensure an accessible environment rather than ad hoc accommodation," end quote. Some others also mentioned that the sessions helped them have conversations in the workplace, build commitment to change, and that the sessions were able to better inform the future of their work as well. So in summary, these evaluation surveys really painted a picture of the ILE concepts that stood out to attendees and how they were able to bring them into their own organizational practices. So now the question is, how do these findings impact disability in workplaces? And to answer this question, I'd like to present some of the feedback collected from our focus group evaluation session. During the focus group, participants were asked to share their most memorable impressions of these workshops and how they've influenced their current work. So I want to acknowledge that the attendees of this focus group were highly open, thoughtful, and engaged. Their responses showed that the ILE sessions can create meaningful impact at several levels. First, we identified language and communication as essential tools for shaping how people view their disabilities and how they identify with or don't with living with a disability, and also how their disability is viewed by others. The use of inclusive and non-ableist language impacts interactions at work, either with coworkers, employers, and even at an organizational policy level. Importantly, participants emphasize the value of using language that follows the ideal model in their day-to-day, rather than the traditional EDI model, which many of us might be familiar with. And just to emphasize it again, ideal stands for inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility leading to belonging. Therefore, language and speech can be highly impactful when it comes to improving accessibility in workplaces. Second, we found that creating a safe space for participants to share stories and engage in honest discussions not only allowed them to better model inclusivity at work, but it laid the groundwork for policy change within organizations. The participants praised Melissa, Realize's incredible national lead in episodic disability, for taking on this compassionate, curious, and non-judgmental approach. And so this approach, when modeled in the workplace, creates inclusive environments that ultimately will influence policy change. Therefore, embodying ideal values on an individual level can be impactful at an organizational and policy level. Third, we discovered that the ILE sessions increase the knowledge and confidence of participants when it comes to talking about episodic disability at work. Some shared that they were very recently able to apply what they learned to create accommodations for an employee living with episodic disability at their organization. Therefore, the ILE sessions enabled participants to directly translate knowledge of episodic disabilities to meaningful action. In summary, the ILE sessions fostered an honest, open, and safe learning environment, one where participants felt encouraged to name challenges and uncertainties, to explore inclusive and innovative ways to have conversations about disability in the workplace, and also to take action and make meaningful change at both the individual and organizational level. Thank you, and I'll now pass it back to Melissa to wrap up the session.
Thanks so much, Sunny. So this was our pilot. We've done this one time, and we hope to do this a whole bunch more times. So if this is something that you or your organization is interested in, please reach out. Please get in touch. We want to keep doing this. We will also be using the ILEs as a springboard to creating what we're calling the Ideal Ready certification. So we will be using this and a couple of other courses along with our online course offerings that already exist to create a fulsome package that a workplace can participate in order to get the Realize Ideal Ready certification. This is not yet ready, but it's coming. We will be ready in the new year to be able to roll this out. So thank you very much for being here, for being so attentive and patient with us as we figured out microphone stuff. And I just want to open it up to see if anybody has any questions out there. Tammy has a microphone, so just give us a sense of if you have some questions, we'd love to hear from you. Go ahead, Steve.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. My name's Steve Mantis with the Ontario Network of Injured Workers Groups. And I'm thinking, geez, could our organization and our local affiliates access that kind of education and training? We don't fit kind of in the model that I heard you talk about because we have no staff. We're all frontline. And in fact, we're people that are experiencing disability for the first time, oftentimes in our lives, as well as dealing with a system that's supposed to help us that oftentimes doesn't help us and leaves us now with mental illness. So we're both healing and at the same time trying to support others going through the same thing, as well as make the system actually be more responsive to us. Would we fit in terms of kind of some of your education going forward?
I think so. The greatest nature, like the greatest piece of the ILE is its flexibility. So it would be about working with someone who had a really good sense of the needs of the people involved in your organization and picking which parts of each session would be the most relevant and applicable, and then expanding and contracting the other parts to make sure that this is a session that is useful and resonant for the folks that are participating in it. We would do our level best to make it happen. Any other questions? There's one on that side, a couple over there, and then one on the other side, and one in the middle. Tammy, you've got your work cut out for you. That's right. Get your steps in.
Hi there. Thanks
Hello.
for your presentation. It was really great to hear about the work you folks are doing. I'm from the Canadian Labour Congress. My question is just, Melissa, you spoke about making space for people with a range of questions. And Sunny spoke about, or sorry, not Sunny, Shri spoke about ensuring that people who are affected are not doing the labor. And so I'm wondering how you guys balanced the need to have a safe space for people who are living with episodic disabilities and for the questions that people who aren't living with those disabilities might have had that come from ableist thinking.
This is part of the challenge of these kinds of education deliverables, really. And it is about doing what I can as the facilitator to find the appropriate balance there. When people have questions, my approach is non-judgmental, but I'm also not going to take any shit from anyone, right? So it's important to stay open without judgment, and also call people in and be gentle about, you know, where they're coming from, naming this as an ableist learned attitude that can be unlearned and that can then be something that we shift and change. And that labor is mine to do as the facilitator. I do not call on participants to address those kinds of questions. I do not ask people with lived experience to share of their personal stories when questions like this come up. If people want to share their stories, that's something that they are welcome to do in a different context. All right, I hope that answers your question. Okay, thank you. Who else is out there? I know there's someone over here, Tammy, but someone over there. Okay.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this 4th annual National Summit on Episodic Disabilities and Employment. My name is Stephen Litton. I'm president of BC Aboriginal Network on Disability Society, and I'm also president of Aboriginal Disability Canada here in Ottawa. I want to thank the panel. I want to thank the leader of the panel for this deeper dive, because as an Aboriginal person, we have no other option, or we may never have another opportunity to share from our perspective what we're dealing with on a daily basis, let alone on the workforce. I truly believe this is no judgment or anything, just a recommendation to, in order for you, for your organization or anyone you work with to give us a hand up, we would like to give you a hand up. No judgment, just to make some recommendations on your panel. Representation of every race should be on your panel to build true relationships. For me as an Aboriginal person, once again, there's no other option but to be involved in this deeper dive. And I'd also like to say, how do we establish trust and a meaningful relationship? Our historical trauma and unfair treatment makes it difficult for us as a people to be vulnerable. We need you to could you read the rest, please? I'm gonna have my assistant to help you.
So Stephen asks, or Stephen states that we need you to be understanding about our culture, stick with us, and be kind and understanding in terms of sensitivity. The only way you can be a part of the solution is to be there in person, to see us and to listen to us. This is not a short-term act. Your actions need to be ongoing and meaningful. So Western society expects us as Indigenous peoples to understand Canadian culture and society. You must give us that same respect. Race is always involved in these conversations and conferences, and in everything that we do.
And I want to thank you, Julia, for sharing that with me. I could barely even with these glasses, I could barely see. So I want to thank the panel and everybody else for allowing me to share. And thank you, panel leader, for the deeper dive.
Thank you so much for your comments, Stephen. You're right. We do need to do everything we can to be very broadly inclusive and to pay attention to how we're using words and the way that we're thinking about things. I think we've got time for one more question. I know there was someone over here. Yes. Oh, okay. We've got a couple. Okay. Very quick. If we don't get to your question, I'm very happy to chat with you afterwards as well.
Just wanted to make a point. I think your ideas are really good. But I think we need to go further than that. I mean, we need to also prioritize initiatives that are bringing in lived experience already. I'm from Winnipeg, so my name is Carlos Sosa. I am a UFCW member, but I'm also involved in an initiative in Winnipeg that is about actually creating safer spaces and bringing lived experience right into these spaces and paying them a living wage. And so I'd like to talk to you further because I think this training could be very, very beneficial to the program that I'm involved with because it uses a supported employment model, which is very innovative social enterprise approach. So in terms of, I'm going to go with you're right there. You talked about ensuring that executive directors do this work. So what are your suggestions to nonprofits and agencies to build that work in to their mandates? Because often many nonprofits are struggling with disability about how to do that. That seems to be almost like a side, and they're not prioritizing that when they should be, because a lot of their clientele happens to have be a person with a disability, probably about 50 or 60%, and yet they just don't build it into their programming.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, when we started doing this work, realized, there are a lot of folks that feel really uncomfortable and scared to, be open about, some of about having a disability or taking time off or requesting for accommodations because of that. So we're all there with each other, right? And it's so, but to your question about executive directors, I think, what we are working on is, and we've done this in other areas as well, is drafting a commitment statement for EDs to take to their boards and have boards sign on. And, that act of signing on, and it's a pretty simple one-pager statement, but the act of them signing on is also a commitment from them that will resource this. I think you need to have not just the words, but the resources, committing to the resources to make that happen. And EDs need the support from the board, right? They need their board to back them up and help them make sure that this can happen. And I think that's what I really, what you're saying about how it's always off the side of the desk, I think that's happens to so many of these issues. When we're talking about anti-oppression, it's really hard when especially for folks who carry multiple identities, right? Like to think about having to separate them, and each one becomes sort of an issue. And when I don't see my different identities as issues, for one thing, but so I think it's really part of that culture change is intersectionality. It's like not just the word, but understanding what does it mean when we say that? Can we all get on the same page with that? And can we work from that approach? Like once we understand what that means, I think we can start to pull all these things together. So nobody's, we're not doing certain things off the side of our desk, but, seeing it connected. They're all connected, right? And it's a way we belong to each other. Everybody keeps talking about belonging. Belonging is belonging to each other, all of us, in our full ways. And I think intersectionality is sort of a way of recognizing that relationship that I think we can build with each other.
Thanks. And thanks for squeezing in my question. Although, it's a little bit of a two-parter because I think I just want to clarify, maybe I missed something in the opening remarks, Melissa, that you made about the project. I'm interested in the person, was it equal participation in the dialogues that you had or the learning sessions? Was it equal participation of employers and employees, or was it actually more oriented around creating the safe space for employees to talk about their perspectives on episodic disabilities, and employers were in separate conversations?
This was a session that we were asked to do for Toronto neighborhood centers, focused exclusively on their leadership and board. So the idea was to create culture change at that level, build understanding and confidence at that level. Because as Sri said, frontline folks are doing this work all the time, right? And so when there is that shift in understanding at a leadership level, we see the two begin to meet in the middle a little bit more readily. There is often a big difference between what folks who are doing frontline work understand about disability justice and DEI and ideal work, and what leadership understand and know about that. And we're trying to narrow that gap a bit.
So that's excellent. That dovetails to the second part of my question, which is really about the part you mentioned around training and this whole notion of the ideal ready certification that you talked about. It sounds super exciting. But I guess I'm interested, is the intended audience hopefully not going to be relegated to the HR professionals and the frontline workers who already are living and breathing this stuff, but it's to anybody in the masses who might want to become certified in this area of intellectual capacity and emotive connection with the people who have these disabilities. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
We are hoping to begin these things as a whole organization-wide educational opportunity with an initial introductory live human session, and then online courses, and then another live human session, right? So we're bookending it with opportunities to connect with some independent learning or even learning group opportunities that are facilitated by the organization themselves, that, perhaps every Tuesday for an hour, everyone gets together and debriefs the online course that they were taking that week, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
We're still in development, of course. So lots of ideas percolating, but that is the idea, is to bring this broadly to an organization, to individuals as they want.
Fabulous. And I wish you all the best of luck with it. Thank you.
All right, that's everything from us. I'm going to pass it back over to Tammy, but thank you again for all of your attention. If you have any questions, please come and have a chat with us, okay?